We're super excited to launch the EndoML platform here on the Scope Forward podcast. There's a major opportunity to democratize AI research and development in the GI community. And earlier this year, we crossed over 2 million full-length, high-definition endoscopy procedure recordings. We're growing now over 1 million new procedures. I think it's kind of the classic exponential fallacy where you don't see the exponential coming until it's kind of passed you by. And I think we're in general underestimating the transformative change that happens when you get systems that are truly super intelligent at kind of an undeniable level. Massive change coming at us much faster than most people think.
Matt Schwartz, founder and CEO of Virgo. I'm so glad to have you back again on the Scope Forward show, Matt.
Yeah, great to be here. It's good to see you at DDW and looking forward to this conversation.
You're someone who probably needs no introduction in the gastroenterology, entrepreneurship, and innovative circles. The way I see it is you pretty much grew up in gastroenterology and you've done the grind of building a startup and you've done a phenomenal job. And here's where you are. So congratulations on all the progress.
Yeah, thank you. We like to joke with people that we got our start as a company at the AGA Tech Summit back in, I think it was April of 2017, and really grew up around that community. And we owe a lot to the broader GI community for helping to foster our growth too.
Matt, without holding back and not being really shy about it, can you please boast all the big wins of Virgo so far? I want to start off with one. And please correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have the world's largest database of endoscopy videos.
Certainly that we're aware of. Earlier this year, we crossed over 2 million full-length, high-definition endoscopy procedure recordings. We're growing now over 1 million new procedures per year, and that number continues to climb as more sites adopt the Virgo platform.
Excellent. Please share and give us an update on Virgo before we move on to the crux of what we want to talk about today, which is EndoML. But give us an update on Virgo.
Yeah, so definitely an exciting year for us here at Virgo. We announced in January the training of an AI foundation model for endoscopy that we call EndoDINO, an extremely powerful model that we've shown achieves state-of-the-art performance in a wide range of GI endoscopy tasks. We also have some upcoming research publications showing kind of new capabilities within AI for GI endoscopy that we're super excited about that I think are really pushing the frontier. And that AI foundation model, EndoDINO, is empowering some new exciting opportunities for clinicians. You mentioned EndoML. We're super excited to launch the EndoML platform here on the Scope Forward podcast. We're very excited about putting this tool into the hands of clinicians. We think there's a major opportunity to democratize AI research and development in the GI community, and we're hoping to really supercharge that with the EndoDINO foundation model.
So I'm very excited, Matt, and thank you for choosing the Scope Forward platform to make this announcement. So what is EndoML?
Yeah. So EndoML is a platform that allows any clinician, researcher, any healthcare provider to bring their own data to the table, and they can upload that data, they can label the data, and then they can actually train their own machine learning models. And part of the idea here is that, we as a third-party company, we have our own ideas about where AI can go and where some interesting applications for AI may be, and we work on those things internally. But we're very confident that physicians and researchers have a whole universe of unexplored AI concepts and things that they would like to build. And we think there's a major opportunity to empower healthcare providers, clinicians, and researchers to build their own models and explore that broader universe of AI in gastroenterology. There are certainly available tools in the computer vision landscape for kind of general AI development today. But what we think is really unique about EndoML is that it's powered by this foundation model that we've developed in EndoDINO. And what that does is it takes away a lot of the heavy lifting from the researcher, the healthcare provider, they don't have to label nearly as much data because the EndoDINO Foundation model contains such a powerful representation of GI endoscopy. So all of a sudden, whereas an AI project in GI might have taken someone capturing several thousand videos and then painstakingly labeling all of them, we find that you can reduce the number of labeled samples by 1 or even 2 orders of magnitude and still get very high performance in the machine learning models that you build. So that's the general idea, and it's developed as just a web platform for folks to sign up and bring their own data and train their own models and go from there.
So you used a bunch of terms in there, and I want to break those down. So can you explain, as you would to a 7-year-old, what a foundational model is?
Foundation model is a really important conceptual term, and it gets used and defined differently. But in general, you can think of a foundation model as a backbone for machine learning systems that gets trained on a very, very large amount of data. And ideally, that data comes from a very wide diversity of sources. The foundation model itself typically doesn't perform any specific task. But what it can do is take new data and create really powerful compressed embeddings or signatures on that data that allows you to build a new application on top of it. In the computer vision space, it's very common to, first process new images or new videos through a foundation model to create the extracted features for a given data set. And then from there, you can build a classification model or an object detection model or a segmentation model on top of those features. Oftentimes what you find is that a foundation model is trained using either unsupervised or self-supervised training methods. And we think this is another really important topic for folks that are interested in AI to understand. The kind of traditional or historical paradigm in AI that folks may be more familiar with is called supervised training. And supervised learning or supervised training is when you're labeling every single data sample that you place into the model, and then you're trying to teach the model or have the model learn to predict those labels that you've created. With self-supervised learning or unsupervised learning, things work a little bit differently. Typically, you're feeding in just raw, unlabeled data to the model, and then you use these different techniques to try to get the model to learn from the data itself. And the reason this can be so powerful is it's much easier to obtain extremely large data sources that are not labeled than it is to actually pay or find the time to label all of that data. And maybe to draw an analogy to large language models, self-supervised learning has been paramount in kind of the ChatGPT, GPT revolution, where models are really learning to predict the next word in the sequence. And so the label, the thing that the model is trying to learn, is already present in the data itself. And I think people have started to get a really good grasp of what that means, doing this next word or next token prediction. But as it turns out, you can apply very similar principles in the world of computer vision using some different techniques. And so as an example of what that might look like, you could, for example, take a bunch of endoscopy images and randomly blur out a different section of the image and then force a model to learn how to fill in or correct that data where it already knows what the end product looks like. And as it turns out, if you do this with enough scale and enough data, the underlying foundation model, in our case EndoDINO, learns to represent all these different concepts within endoscopy. And so again, the trick is finding the largest data set that you possibly can, even if the data is not labeled. And it turns out the model is able to learn from the data itself how to represent all these techniques within endoscopy. So as just a sense of the scale for EndoDINO, we train the model on a data set coming from over 3.5 billion frames of endoscopy data. There are different curation techniques to kind of pick out the best frames from within that, but the scale there is just truly massive. And that was actually even less than 10% of the overall data set that we've got available. So we're very excited about version 2 of EndoDINO. We expect will be all the more powerful and actually unlock some really interesting new capabilities in GI endoscopy.
So what's the benefit for an endoscopist? Say somebody uses this platform. Let me kind of summarize, what you said. So there's EndoDINO, so that is the foundation model. And as a foundation model, it's been trained on a very large data set that you have fed it, and like 1.5 million or all these videos, and it has learned, and you've created a certain foundation, like a foundation model. Now, on top of that, you have built machine learning models, and you're calling it EndoML, that people can use. People can upload their own videos or their own images, and then use this machine learning algorithm to either train, label, or use it any which way that they want. And when they do that, that goes back and also improves the foundation model. And then that foundation model gets even better when you use the next time on, and if somebody else uses it, or so therefore you can build new applications.
I think that's largely correct. The idea is that the EndoDINO as a foundation model layer, what you can do is place a new image through the foundation model, and you get these features out of your image that it's kind of like you get the advantage of the billions of frames that we've trained the foundation model on. That benefit gets applied to your specific data, and that allows you as a healthcare provider or a researcher to build a machine learning model for your specific task much easier than if you wanted to just build the entire thing from scratch, where you've got to label a ton of data samples, and the actual modeling process is more complex. And if it's helpful, maybe I could show you EndoML and kind of walk you through the flow.
No, definitely. I just want to clarify one thing though. So the foundation model, the EndoDINO, is equivalent to, let's say, ChatGPT, which is trained on a very large data set, in this case, the entire world's wisdom and internet. Now, EndoML would be somewhat of a tool that sits on top of this foundation model. So in this case, like a tool that helps you use ChatGPT, for example, in a particular manner, in a certain way, and then you build on top of that. Am I conveying it?
Yeah, I think to be maybe a little bit more precise for the folks in the audience that might want to hear the details, EndoDINO is a model, and I think the equivalent in the ChatGPT world would be like the different models that they offer. So 4.0 or 4.5 or GPT, their O3 model. And then ChatGPT is the actual tool or application that OpenAI offers around those models. I think EndoML is, a very different application to ChatGPT, but it's more at that ChatGPT application level. If you're thinking about the open source world, EndoDINO is maybe more like one of the Llama models from Meta. Or even they have computer vision models that we based our work off of. Dino V2 is their open source computer vision model. And then, people build these different applications on top of the Llama models or the Dino V2 model.
Please, by all means, show, your creation. It'll be nice to understand what you said in words. We can actually see what you were saying.
Yeah, so we can kind of walk through the process here of how to use EndoML, and I've got some projects that are already pre-processed that I think will be a little bit better for demo, so we don't have to sit around waiting for things to process. But what you see along the left is I've got different projects that I've created here within the EndoML platform. The data that we're using here, I believe, is from the Hyperquasier dataset of open data. It's a great dataset for benchmarking AI tools in gastroenterology. And so the couple of different tasks that we've looked at, things like all sorts of GI anatomy, both upper endoscopy and lower endoscopy. We've got then a lower GI anatomy task, an upper GI anatomy task, bowel prep scoring, esophagitis classification, Mayo scoring for ulcerative colitis. The through line is that these are all classification tasks. And what that means right now, the EndoML platform only works on images. We expect to eventually roll out work on videos. But for any given image, you assign a label to that image. And you can actually do that in the annotate page of the platform. Here I've already labeled all of the images in this project, and so you get a nice fun confetti effect when you finish labeling. But you can see in the GI Anatomy Mixed project, we've got images that have been labeled as the cecum, the rectum, where the endoscopist is doing a retroflex maneuver, the pylorus, the Z-line in the esophagus, and then retroflex in the stomach. And so every single label out of these 4,086 has been labeled as one of these different classes. Now, what we can do is go to the training page, and maybe actually I'll take a step back here. So as all of the images are labeled, they get processed by EndoDINO. And you see, once an image is processed, it gets this processed tag. What that means is we've taken each one of these images and fed it through the EndoDINO foundation model. And then in the database, we store the features that are extracted for each one of those images. Those features, for the model that we're using, it's, I think, 768 numbers. They're just floating point numbers. To a human, they don't mean anything, but it's a way that the EndoDINO model has learned to represent images in a very high dimensional space that you can then use to try to segment out which of these images are the cecum versus the pylorus. And so that's what we go ahead and do on the training page. So on the training page, we'll get a little visualization of the breakdown of the data. You can see we've got 1,000 samples of the cecum. We've got 391 samples of retroflex rectum, 999 samples of pylorus, Z-line, retroflex stomach. What we can then do is go to this very simple configuration tab for model training. And this gives a healthcare provider some default examples that they can just give the model a name. So I'll call this Praveen's model. There are sliders here, so you can adjust the different hyperparameters of your training model, but candidly, in a lot of cases, just the defaults here will work quite well out of the box. And you click Start Training. And so you can see this is simple enough that you don't have to have a master's or a PhD in computer vision or machine learning to use this system. The model will start training here in the back end. And it's now queued up. It's running on my local system, and so it's not going to show the real-time updates, but I'll give it a refresh and we'll see if it started to load here. The model itself, what it's doing is training on those EndoDINO features that we've already extracted for each of the images. So we've got 4,000 total images. Each image has its set of EndoDINO features. And the model is going through and trying to say, if I've got features that look like this, is it the retroflex rectum or the pylorus? And it goes through that training iteration process. Now, normally when you hear of training machine learning models, you're used to hearing about people training on like large GPU clusters, and you've got to do training that can take several hours, several days, sometimes even months for some of the very biggest large language models. Because we've done all the heavy lifting with the EndoDINO foundation model, training each of these individual classification models is very quick. You can see your model's already done here. And so we were able to achieve 99.8% accuracy. We've got the training loss. This is a measure called AUROC. We've got some detailed metrics on each of the individual classes, and then a confusion matrix. And you can see in the test samples that the model never saw during the training process, it actually only misclassified one example here where it predicted one image as the pylorus when it's actually the Z-line, which is a mistake that a machine learning model could easily make. Now, one of the other things I could show you when we ran this first model, I'll call this one Praveen's second model. So in your first model, we used 80% of the data available for training. So that's data that the model is seeing, getting to learn from and update on. And then we use 10% of the data for validation along the way. And then this last 10% is data that we held out, and the model didn't get to see it until it was finally done. And that's the test results that we report out on at the end. Now, you can see the model accuracy was very, very high on that first model, 99.8%. This is a task that, it's not the hardest task in the world to classify these different images. But what's really cool about EndoDINO is it can learn from much fewer samples than other machine learning models might need. So What I'm going to do here is I'm going to slide this way, way down. We'll slide it down to say 10%. We'll try this. We'll see how it works. I'm going to use 10% of the images for training the model, 10% of the images for validating the model, and then a huge set, 80% of the images, the model's never going to see, and it just has to try to predict when the training is done. So this becomes a much harder task. There's a lot more variability that the model needs to try to generalize to. I'll bump up the number of epochs, we'll say to 50 epochs, and I'm going to leave everything else the same, and I'm going to start training. So while that's training in the background, maybe I'll just check in with you, Praveen, and see, is this all making sense so far? Any questions you might have while this model is training in the background?
Yeah, no, good. So, Matt, so we've done this, right? And we've done Praveen's first model and second model. Now, I have a very basic question. What do I do with this now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now in the EndoML platform, this is kind of where things go. You can train these models. We think for like research abstracts, this can create really valuable information if you want to publish an abstract on your model. We are working on ways to help you actually deploy the model from there. So for starters, one of the things that we'll have in the platform soon is you'll be able to take other data that was not part of your training process. You can load that data and you can get a result back. And again, for starters, that will happen in the EndoML platform. So if you've got another research project and you want to do what's called inference and predict on a bunch of data, you'll be able to use your model that you've already trained and make a bunch of predictions. Now, where this is naturally going is how do you actually use this in clinical practice? And we do see opportunities to connect this to endoscopy report writing systems. And so if you want to actually get results back into an endoscopy report, we can build out direct HL7 FHIR integrations and send information back to your endoscopy report. And then eventually, there are ways to deploy these models into clinical practice for real-time use. And we do anticipate building up some tooling that will help people deploy their own models on their own systems locally, and potentially even doing that on Virgo capture devices. So, Virgo capture device is not just capturing video, but can actually run one of your models that you've trained here in the EndoML platform. To be clear, not available today, but it is definitely the direction that we're headed with the EndoML platform. Something we're super excited about is actually helping people to deploy models that they've trained on their own.
Okay, so let's complete what you have to show me here, and then I have some more questions.
Cool. So Praveen's second model here looks like it also did quite well. So again, just to make sure everyone understands, I guess, how much harder this task was. On the first model, we used 80% of the data to train the model. That was a lot of samples, 3,000 something samples for training. In the second model, we only showed the model 10% of the data. So it was like a few hundred samples in total. But you can see the performance was still extremely good across all of the different classes. And if we look at this confusion matrix, there are a few more incorrect predictions, but in general, we're trying to make predictions across a very large data set. The model still performed extremely well. And the key takeaway from this is called generalizability. And this is a core concept in machine learning models. One of the things you run into as a machine learning model developer is you train your model and you evaluate it on your own data. What's critical though is how is that model going to generalize to a new environment that it hasn't seen before? And a lot of times this is where you see problems with machine learning models that are deployed in healthcare. They may have been trained on a really refined set of data from a handful of locations, maybe even as part of a really well-controlled clinical trial. And then when it goes out into the real world, the performance doesn't really match what was shown in the model training. And one thing you can do to try to correct for that is just collect more and more and more labeled data from different sources. But we take a different approach. And again, this comes back to the foundation model, where our foundation model is trained on this enormous volume of data from a very wide variety of locations. And you get this generalizability baked into the foundation model so that when you go to train your specific model, so if you want to train a model on polyp classification, it can generalize really well to your specific data set. And again, this is a different paradigm where we see doctors building their own CADe systems or CADx systems, and they can be fine-tuned to their specific data and take advantage of the generalizability of the underlying foundation model. We currently have a waitlist open for EndoML if folks want to go to endoml.ai and sign up. We expect to open the waitlist to more users here in the next week or two. And we're looking for feedback on what people want to build within EndoML. We've started with still images and image classification. In the background, we're working on object detection, which can help you do, bounding box around a polyp or bounding box around an ulcer. We've also done some internal work on object segmentation, which is not just a bounding box, but actually drawing basically every pixel that is part of a polyp versus not a polyp, or an instrument versus not an instrument. And part of the excitement around this platform is that we can make rapid changes and add new features to the tool itself. And so would love to hear from folks in the audience. If you've ever had kind of an aha moment or a shower thought about, I'd love if there was an AI for this in endoscopy. We'd love to hear about it, see if you can't already build it in EndoML, see what we can do to help you make that real in EndoML.
This is amazing. And I just want to spend some time reflecting with you on where this could go. And I want to actually dumb down the conversation to very, very simple terms and, without using any technical lingo at all, right? So here we have a system that you can use very easily to train endoscopy images and videos in your style, like the way that you're used to. So now this system has learned. Now, if you just fast forward this a little bit, after the system has learned and you've created a system in your style, you've used EndoML, and it's picked up, how you like to annotate, classify, all of that, right? You may not be required, right? So anybody should be able to use it and train it. So I could even have a technician, for example, who is, forget the rules and the regulatory aspect. Let's put that aside. But I can potentially have technician, and this is you, so I'm a world-class endoscopist. I've trained this exactly like how I see, and it has learned. Now this can become an extension of me. Instead of me, maybe 10 technicians can be doing endoscopy just like me, and I can supervise them maybe. And I want to extend this even further. Why limited to my zip code and my geography and my surgery center? I can pretty much extend it the world over, especially places where there's no gastroenterologist, endoscopist available. My mind is firing on many different cylinders.
You're the futurist. Why not extend it to robots also? Yeah, this is the direction that we see things heading. I think we've been in this era or paradigm where AI has been kind of shrouded in complexity and expertise. And I think we see that in the GI world, where you rely on these, large industry players to be the ones handling that expertise and the complexity. But if you look outside of GI, it's obvious what's happening in the world of ChatGPT. The complexity of AI is being abstracted away, and individuals without that expertise are able to do these incredible things with AI tools. And
exactly. From programming to financial equity portfolio management to science projects. I mean, pretty much every field.
Exactly. And, our goal here is to try to bring that sort of ethos from the general technology sphere into gastroenterology. And we think we're well positioned to do it primarily because of the data that we've been capturing. We made this bet back when we started the company in 2017 that the missing ingredient for unlocking AI value in gastroenterology was not algorithms or expertise. It was the data. And it was the fact that nobody was really saving the data at scale. It took a while, but we feel like that bet that we made in 2017 is really now paying off. And the broader AI technology sphere has caught up, and we're drafting on the state of the art in computer vision as an example, and allows us to hopefully build this sort of tool that can help people realize a ChatGPT type of moment in gastroenterology.
I've had this conversation with a few AI and GI companies before, and the conversation would go like this. So my premise was AI in general is learning from so many different things, from all kinds of images, from all kinds of fields, and including faces and all of that. So how difficult would it be for the algorithm itself to get sophisticated enough to start detecting polyps? Because all you need now is to start feeding that data. And one of the responses, that I got was that, no, we are underestimating medical arena. We're underestimating gastroenterology. The FDA process is a big bottleneck. So therefore, it'll be a long while for people to do something like that. But based on what you're showing me with EndoML and this conversation, I'm thinking that may not be a bottleneck anymore.
I certainly agree with you, and I think it's kind of the classic exponential fallacy where you don't see the exponential coming until it's kind of passed you by. And I think we're basically there right now, actually. One of the things that really caught our attention and opened our eyes was Meta. They've got Facebook AI Research Group, run by Jan LeCun. They, in our opinion, are the world leaders in self-supervised computer vision understanding work. And in 2023, they released an open source model called DINO V2, trained on an enormous volume of just general web images and natural images, no medical images, no endoscopy. And they were getting state-of-the-art results in basically every single computer vision task for natural images. And we started testing that model in endoscopy and found it wasn't perfect, but it worked incredibly well. And that is really what gave us the signal that it was time to build a foundation model for endoscopy. And that's what we did with EndoDINO. We trained this model on purely endoscopy data, and we get even better performance on GI tasks than what you would get with DINO V2. And the regulatory piece here, I think, is going to be fascinating. And I think there are some tailwinds that can really move this in the right direction with the FDA. But our stance, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a trained regulatory professional. I've spent time around a lot of regulatory professionals, but our stance and kind of speaking with our counsel is that a foundation model on its own is not a medical device. It doesn't have indications for use. EndoDINO doesn't do any diagnosis or clinical decision support. And the FDA has actually given guidance that foundation models in that capacity don't need 510K clearance. They don't need clearance or approval from the FDA. And we think that opens the door to healthcare providers building their own AI applications on top of EndoDINO. And the FDA doesn't regulate the practice of medicine. They've been very clear about that. Physicians are able to build their own medical devices and technology and use them in their own practice. If a healthcare provider or healthcare system wants to commercialize some AI that it's built, at that point, they're, building a medical device and they need to go through FDA regulatory channels to do so. But for just the clinical practice of medicine, people can build what they want. And you actually see this in radiology. I was actually just at this open source AI summit hosted by Meta at their office in Austin, Texas last week. And it was a fascinating conference. It was a small group, about 50 AI practitioners and researchers across healthcare, material science, mathematics. And in radiology, they're in a lot of ways ahead of the curve. And I met a radiologist at MD Anderson who is using open source computer vision models from Meta to build their own AI systems that they use in clinical practice at MD Anderson. No FDA clearance or approval required. And that's sort of the unlock that we want to see here in the GI space. And I think it can lead to just rapid progress. Like one of the problems with the FDA is that the timelines don't match up with the pace of progress in AI. If you're needing 6 months to get something cleared by the FDA, 6 months in a good scenario, 6 months later, the AI world has long since passed you by. You are way
it's going to double, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, we're not only excited just from like a technical standpoint of what this can enable, but from just a paradigm perspective, I think it's a total shift in mindset and shift in capabilities, and will hopefully enable much more rapid progress in the field.
I can easily see a fully automated endoscopy room surgery center. So I know of a startup out of Texas, incidentally, that's building a colonoscopy robot. Combining this with the robot, I mean, I can go into the endo room and then click a button and then just watch it, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I ever told you this, but before I started Virgo, I was a product manager at Intuitive Surgical.
Yeah, Intuitive Surgical, yeah.
And, I was getting just fascinated with machine learning and computer vision and self-driving cars. And actually, like, the first idea I had was to record robotic surgery to eventually automate Da Vinci robotic surgeries, and ultimately found that from a procedural volume perspective, GI endoscopy, it's an order of magnitude or two larger than all the surgical specialties combined. And so it's a really great place to start. But we are starting to actually come back around now and starting to record some Da Vinci robotic surgery procedures. And I totally agree with you. I've always thought that the thing that can really unlock automated robotic procedures is the computer vision side of things. It's the navigation. It's what you see in self-driving cars. What allows Tesla to build full self-driving is computer vision capability. And the way you do that is through massive scalable data collection, foundation models on top of it. And it's not a core focus of ours right now, but I do see this future world where the AI foundation modeling that we're developing can become kind of like the brains and the eyes and the navigation system of a future robotics platform.
Drawing analogy with humanoid robots, which are at the cusp of launch right now. Like we're going to see them before 2030. We've been seeing Tesla bots, and there's another company called Figure that's putting things out there. From a B2B standpoint, in the business world, these Figure robots are already working in BMW plants and doing all of that. The consumer grade robots, we're going to see them soon. The interesting thing is some of these companies, and there are at least, as I understand, about 60 companies working on humanoids. The interesting thing is many of these companies are not very old companies, the new companies. The big choke point for robotics until now was lack of training data. With AI, the AI has been generating a whole lot of training data, and therefore robotics has been accelerating. And with robotics accelerating, it's creating even more training data for the AI to get better, and one is feeding off the other. The reason that this came to mind to me is that I can't see any reason why that can't happen within gastroenterology.
It's hard to predict when, and it's hard to foresee the regulatory bottlenecks or the incentive reimbursement bottlenecks. But from a first principles perspective, I totally agree with you. If, do you design an automated colonoscopy robotic system that is feeding the scope using its own robotics? Or do you just have a humanoid come in and operate an endoscope the same way a gastroenterologist would? And it's hard to see, this debate happens in all areas of robotics, but it's hard to come up with a first principles reason why that's not possible at this point. I think it's just a matter of time, kind of engineering and training data, like you said. But it seems like if you're the patient and you're anesthetized, do you know if a humanoid robot is controlling your scope versus a gastroenterologist when you wake up? I don't know. It's hard to see where that falls down.
To be fair to the patient, sometimes a patient might prefer a predictable robot to a tired endoscopist.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's draw the conversation to the endoscopist. I'm sure people listening or watching would be doing endoscopy or would have done endoscopy today or yesterday. If I have to step into their shoes, my mind will fire in two different directions, right? Like, so one will be WTF,
Yeah.
and what is this? And I don't want this to happen. So
Yeah.
I'm going to resist this change as much as possible. The challenge for that line of thinking is that, yeah, you can resist it, you can prevent it. But if you know game theory, the other guy is not going to wait. So then I have this other way that my mind will think, which is, wow, this stuff is exciting. I know this set is going to resist it and they won't go forward with it. So therefore, I'm going to accelerate it. I'm actually going to be like that MD Anderson physician
Yes.
who embraced AI in radiology and then created tools for it. So I'm going to be
Yeah.
the guy to run first, embrace this, start building things. Heck, like, a cognitive oriented, not the rank and file, but the cognitive oriented endoscopist could possibly build a company on top of EndoML. I mean, do you see
At
that
least,
happening?
yeah, if not a company, at least a brand. And I think, I don't know that this holds in perpetuity as AI and robotics gets better and better and better, but in the kind of like midterm, I do think people can be really successful leveraging their own brand and expertise with AI. You see this like as the news industry has been disrupted, there's been this rise of individual experts that have their own personal trusted brand. They can even leverage AI to kind of put out better news products. I see a world where, like, I don't know, if you're one of the preeminent academic healthcare systems or a preeminent private equity backed practice or even a smaller private practice, with EndoML, you can build your own CADe for polyp detection or whatever it might be, and actually market to your patients that you're using AI, but it's not a general AI. It's actually AI trained on your specific data, what you were saying before, the way you like to do procedures, the thing that helps you. And I think that can be a way for forward thinking practices to standardize as a group to say, this is the way we do things. And you can lean into it also. You can say, we as a group, we don't just have our own polyp detection system. We built our own polyp classification that interacts with our own pathology and does things really the way that we like to do them. And so I agree with you. I think you can just resist it. That's one route to go and try to hang on for as long as possible. But I do see that as a path to eventual disruption. It's hard to say exactly when. But on the flip side, I think you could be an early adopter group and really distinguish yourself from pack as, yeah, again, we don't just use AI, we actually partake in the development and validation and rollout of our own AI systems. I think, I don't know, it's a much brighter future. I think it's a more exciting future, and I think it's more defensible as a practice.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. People listening should totally just jump on this.
Come talk to me. Yeah.
And yeah, as quickly as possible and just start playing. Matt, a lot of things that I use today and I have used and that's been tremendously beneficial for me. Tools and things that I've played with, how I'm going to use it, I had no idea. I'm about to launch a workshop on AI called AI Mastery. This wouldn't have been possible, or even the idea of launching such a workshop would not have come about had I not played
ChatGPT
yeah,
stuff.
with
Yeah.
ChatGPT and all the AIs. Like when something launched, like I was playing with it, I was doing that, and that's how initiatives happen. That's how things happen, and I can see this happening in gastroenterology. So fantastic. Let's spend a few minutes talking about AI in general, and then wrap
Yeah.
our conversation up. So where is AI going? I know you watch the space very, very closely, as I do, but I'm curious to know your take on world over. Where's AI going? We're in
Yeah.
middle of 2025.
This is one person's opinion, and so take it with a grain of salt. But ever since I first came to know about deep learning back in this like 2015, I started to really understand machine learning and was taking courses. I feel like I've always been much more bullish and optimistic about the pace of progress than what I see generally. And I still feel like that's the case. I feel like the general public is grossly underestimating the pace of progress that we're seeing right now. And people talk a lot about agents right now. 2025 is the year of agents, and I think it's pretty undeniably true. I mean, I used a programming agent to build EndoML as a platform. I wrote, well under 1% of the code. The rest of it was written by large language models as agents kind of running off on their own. OpenAI just launched a new programming agent called CADx that looks quite interesting, that can complete entire pull requests in code on its own for review. And just last week, and I mentioned I was at this open source AI summit hosted by Meta, and I was really fascinated that a panel discussion on AI for mathematics. And it doesn't get all the headlines the way large language models do, but there are some, I think, really interesting breakthroughs happening in core AI for math and AI for computer science itself that are feeding forward in the progress. And so Google just announced something last week called Alpha Evolve that kind of takes on their AlphaGo modeling, where they do self-play and self-learning. It does it specifically for algorithm development and mathematical theorem proving. I think the pace is just accelerating. The field is developing these tools and this knowledge that actually improves the research itself. And I think, I don't know, I'm pretty bullish that we're on a timeline to like real meaningful AGI and artificial superintelligence. I think certainly within the next 2 years. I think a lot of people will say more like 5 to 10 years to be a little bit more conservative. I have a hard time being that conservative with it. And, we talk in healthcare about like, what are the implications of that? Again, I think we're in general underestimating the transformative change that happens when you get systems that are truly super intelligent at kind of an undeniable level. It's hard to even prognosticate about what that looks like. And so I think because it's so hard, we tend to shy away from even thinking about it so much. But like, really, if you catch me in an honest moment, that's what I think. I think there's massive change coming at us much faster than most people think.
Just so people understand, so when you say 2 years AGI, what does that mean?
I think AGI, artificial superintelligence, in the sense where we're going to have AI systems that do AI research at a superhuman level, better than any AI researcher in the world. And that leads to, it's hard to comprehend the speed at which we'll see improvements across all different tasks when that happens, because we can basically scale up AI researchers for the price of GPUs plus energy. So yeah, I think if we're automating AI research, we're automating the vast majority of knowledge work in the economy. I think we're just starting to see the first signs of real job displacement in different pockets. I see like a lot more startups now that are like raising much less capital and hiring far fewer people than they ever have before, because they can do so much more with less. And I think eventually that looks like, I don't know, job dislocation, and I think there'll be pretty massive consequences there.
What's a wild idea that you've had, when all of this becomes available? And it doesn't have to be in GI or healthcare, but I'm just curious, anything occurred to you that, hey, like, this possibility?
I don't know. Like I said, I'm kind of just an AI like default optimist maximalist. I find it hard to come up with things that AI will not be capable of that are just within the laws of physics. I mentioned this at DDW. It gets a little bit gloomy, but I do think I'm really concerned about the existential risk of artificial superintelligent systems that we don't understand and control. And I'd like to make a bit of a case to the healthcare community that like healthcare often gets put on a pedestal by AI labs and researchers as, if we solve AGI, we're going to cure disease and cure cancer. And I think while that might be true, we still need to really think about the potential negative consequences, and we should be thoughtful as a healthcare community about allowing healthcare to be used as kind of the shining example that overshadows potential downsides and risks. There's a lot of information on AI existential risk that I would encourage people to deeply engage with and actually read through. People are curious about it. I'd be happy to point folks in the right direction there. There's a lot of really interesting game theory and reading to be done. On the more optimistic side, I'd say like kind of the craziest idea I've had, I've got a bet on Twitter or X with a mathematician about like AI basically solving one of the major Clay mathematics millennium problems, a problem called the Riemann hypothesis. And I bet him that I think AI is going to resolve the Riemann hypothesis by the end of 2026. He thinks no, he's a mathematician, he's probably right. But I like to think about what could AI potentially achieve, and then what even go further than what you most optimistically think. And I think if you have that hyper optimistic view in AI, it tends to actually prove out to be more right than wrong over time.
Amazing, Matt. I'd love to keep continuing, and I don't think we'll have enough time to cover all the possible directions that this can go. This has been a fantastic primer. This has been a very good wake up call. If people listening, watching, don't sit up and really, really take note, they're in for a big surprise. And it's obvious to me by the end of this conversation.
I appreciate you giving the opportunity. I agree with the wake up call, and if someone disagrees, I'd love to know why and have that discussion too. But it's an exciting time, and I would encourage people, like you said, to play with these tools, even not just our tools, but ChatGPT. Certainly, if you haven't heard of tools like Cursor or Lovable or Bolt for general web development, things are remarkably easy to use and play with now. So I totally echo your sentiment there.
So Matt, as we wrap up our conversation, any final closing comments that you want to leave people with?
I don't think so, other than just please share with me what you would like to build with AI tools in endoscopy. If there's something where you feel like EndoML doesn't quite meet the mark right now, let us know, and chances are we can probably build the tooling for you pretty rapidly, quicker than you think because of AI tools. So yeah, would just encourage people to reach out, find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, would be more than happy to chat.
Excellent. And thank you once again for choosing the Scope Forward platform to make this very exciting announcement.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks for creating the opportunity. It's great.